Welcome once again to On the Brink Radio, broadcast number 239, being recorded on the 1st of March, 2018. We're very lucky to have, again, the legendary Stewart Simonson in Atlanta, Georgia. I've interviewed him on my show several times, and we did a really cool three-way interview with our friend Terry Lilly in Kauai. But Stewart, welcome back, and tell us what you've been doing for the past few months since we last talked.
I mean, besides going to lacrosse games, tennis games, and basketball games?
No, you can include all that, because you're a dad and an independent researcher. And
teenagers, they keep me busy.
And you have a full-time job working for an undisclosed big evil company.
Job.
Yes.
In the military-industrial complex.
Deeply embedded.
So I went to the Big Island of Hawaii, took my family, and I know you were there too. So that was a great 2-week vacation. How long were you there?
I'm still here.
Oh, you're still on the Big Island?
Yeah,
okay.
I've been here about six weeks.
You're right near the Captain Cook Monument?
Yes, about 5 or 6 miles from there.
Okay. Yeah, we took kayaks over to the monument there and snorkeled around the coral reef for the kids. Had a great time.
Did you see the spot where they speared Captain Cook and started passing him around?
Yeah. It was beautiful. The coral was in great shape there. I don't know if you snorkeled it, but yeah. And it's fairly busy tourist site. But I was amazed after visiting Kauai and seeing just 80% dead coral reef to go into the Big Island and seeing it in such great shape.
Yes, and
that was encouraging.
It's particularly amazing with how bad climate change is all over the world. It's by far the worst problem humanity's ever had to confront, and it's just so anomalous. How can these corals here alone in the whole world be escaping that horrendous fate?
You mean that degree over the last 100 years?
Yes,
climate change. It just dropped about 25 degrees here last night. So I'm with you on that, Jeff. I do think humans are having some impact and putting some CO2 up, but is it having as extreme an effect on the environment as we think? I think not.
Well, let me ask you this.
I think it's something else.
Have you ever come across any even reasonably credible actual scientific evidence that demonstrates that the greenhouse effect even applies to the atmosphere, as opposed to in a greenhouse that's actually made of glass or plastic?
Yeah, the ocean's a big heat sink, so it's, of course it's different. It changes temperatures, but it just, they can't correlate it over a very wide space. Back in the old days, corals always used to like warm water, right? They thrive in warm water. You don't find expansive coral reefs in Maine or Canada.
No,
they like warm water.
The furthest one south is Lord Howe Island, and it's about 28 degrees south of the equator.
Yeah, so and that's another reason why I don't think the main stressor is temperature, because the temperature tends to fluctuate wildly from season to season. So
and day to day, with the hour to hour.
From hour to hour. And if the corals were really that sensitive to it, as the water temperature changed, they'd be keeling over dead yearly or monthly. So I think I know what it is. And I think Terry helped confirm that. And I think it's corrosion, which is actually the primary phenomena in saltwater and marine environments that the military and industry has to deal with, right? I found a document or a research paper that goes back, research back to the 1600s when they were putting, wooden ships in the ocean, and all the copper and iron cladding started corroding, and they didn't know what the hell was going on, right? So basically they called it fouling. So basically what I'm saying is the Navy and the maritime industries are fouling the ocean. and it's gone up exponentially as industry and steel ships and the size of the ships and the cathodic systems, they're putting tremendous amount of voltage in the water. And there's nobody that puts more voltage in the seawater than the military.
Yes. Well, is it possible to, this is something I've kind of asked you about before, is it possible to quantify in some gargantuan number the total amount? I mean, of course it would be a guesstimate, but the total amount in some kind of unit of measure, I don't know whether it would be joules or gigawatts or newtons or, some as yet undefined measure of the total amount of stray corrosive electromagnetic energy that's being released into the entire global ocean. In order, of course, to do this, we'd have to have an estimate of the total number of vessels, military, civilian, commercial, and all this stuff. But, I mean, theoretically, it could be done, right?
Yeah, so, I took, there's some great websites that track maritime industrial traffic, right? So, and they give you density maps. Now, I plotted quite a few of those and correlated real well, actually, in the Gulf of Mexico and on the East Coast with locations of more, dead whales floating in, diseased turtles. So that's a density map on the amount of traffic, right? That's like the traffic patterns. And, looking at the Barrier Reef, that's a huge shipping lane right up the east coast of Australia there.
Absolutely.
And so it correlated to that. Now, of course, the military, they don't want to be tracked, right? They don't want you to know where they are.
No.
So that's much harder but you know where their bases are and their ports, so you know where they're coming in and out of. So, all that can be put together. Now, I've gone back, all this is public documentation. An aircraft carrier puts out up to 1,800 amps of electrical current into the seawater around the aircraft carrier. Jeff, it takes 1/10 of an amp to stop your heart, okay?
Yes.
A mammal's heart, 1/10 of an amp, it'll lock it up. So, here comes an aircraft carrier that's putting, it's designed for 1,800 amps for cathodic into the seawater. Maybe it's putting out a quarter of that, but that's still enough to, if I did that in my swimming pool, I'd kill all the neighbors' kids.
Yes. Well, let me ask you this. In terms of amps, how far out beyond the hull of the ship itself, I mean, is there a measure of, say, like if you're half a kilometer away, what's the level?
Seawater has a resistance. And I've got some calculations on my site if anybody logs into it. And it's actually, according to my calculations, a few miles away from a ship, you can have, a hundredth of a milliamp. It doesn't take much to start corrosion, first off. 0.01 milliamps of DC current in the water will accelerate corrosion. And you should think of corrosion as just a slow form of electrocution, right? It's electron exchange. So I calculated that away from a ship that's putting, say, 100 volts or 50 volts of current in the water at, a few hundred amps, that could be impacting corrosion rates a mile or two away.
Yes. Well, now explain what causes corrosion in an unelectrified oceanic environment.
So corrosion is a natural process, right? And there's something called a galvanic series. So as all your different metals, which we call minerals, have a voltage, a natural voltage. And the most reactive metals are like lithium, calcium, magnesium, and then zinc, and then iron's about in the middle. Gold is the least reactive. So that's why if you have a gold ring, it doesn't rust or corrode, right? So all these natural metals, when you put them in a conductive solution, like seawater, which is 10,000 times more conductive than dirt and a lot more conductive than the air, it sets up an electrical current, V equals IR. So you get electrons flowing from one metal to the other. And the one that's most reactive, like calcium and magnesium, will lose their electrons to a more positive metal like iron. So if you put iron and calcium in salt water, the calcium will oxidize and corrode and lose its electrons, and then it dissolves in the water. So it's super common. I mean, industry has to deal with something like a $50 billion industry to deal with corrosion. And, we protect our ships and our structures, but who's protecting the coral reefs? And the answer is nobody. And I think it's a cover-up. It's a conspiracy.
Yes. I even speculated with Terry that because, as you've observed before, the military looks on anything that's in the ocean that's large enough to cast a sonar blip. It's biological interference, or you said they call it biological contaminants. And I went, well, I mean, of course, that's what the Navy looks at the whales and dolphins as, or else why would they seek a permit to, quote-unquote, take, meaning kill or harass, tens of millions of marine mammals? Why would they do that?
So I think what they've done is they've focused on sonar, which, there's passive and active sonar, and they actually want the public to focus on that because it's been well studied and they can show that passive sonar doesn't have a big effect. Okay? What they're doing is diverting your attention from the real problem.
Absolutely.
The real problem is they're putting thousands of amps of electricity into the seawater. That's the real problem.
Absolutely. What I was going to say is, in the same way that they look at the whales and dolphins as obstacles to war fighting, do you think, what I posed to Terry was, do you think that they could look at the entire Great Barrier Reef as an obstacle to all the undersea warfare and shipping lanes and all that stuff, and they actually want it to just totally crumble out of the way as soon as possible? Could that be possible?
I think they don't treat, let's face it, I work with military guys, and, my parents were both in the military, my brother was. So the military's primary goal, most of us think is to defend, right? And it always was to defend, but their primary job in war is to kill things, right? They're professional at killing things, the bad guys. And so they've got all these weapons and systems and electronics that are designed to kill things. And that's basically what they do. So that's what you can expect. I don't think it should surprise anybody.
Well, and
NOAA gives them license to kill.
A lot of what we're talking about is the fact that regardless of whether they're actually engaged in the formal, overt act of killing or warfare, the sheer existence of all this technology and vessels and stuff, just the fact that it's even there, even if it's just sitting there idling, is still killing off everything and waging a form of environmental warfare just by its sheer existence.
Yeah, the military is an environmental disaster. Let's call it what it is. They are an environmental disaster. And, I scoped out and we dived along Kauai there, and those cliffs right under those 30 million watts of antennas, 30 megawatts is enough to power electricity to power a city, Jeff. And they're pulsing that much electricity or electromagnetic radiation, which triggers an electric field, into the air right over that cliff. And those cliffs are all bright red and corroded and oxidized. And if you go in the water right below them, the reef is 100% dead and dissolving.
It's turning into Australia. It's
turning orange and red, and it's dissolving and falling apart. The corals have long been dead, and now the structure and the skeleton is dissolving.
Well, now, is this the same area where Terry supposedly got them to stop doing it all there and moving it 50 miles offshore, but then they came back Is that what's happened?
They do what they want. We had some email. They had a meeting, and I did some slides, and Terry said, yeah, here's all. Terry is awesome, right? His underwater photography and videography is just amazing. And it takes that sort of daily surveying to map out what he did. In other words, you can't just be on a research project and go there for a couple days and get this all mapped out. So, the military met with him. He showed the videos, showed the maps, showed my slides. I showed them what corrosion is. They already know what corrosion is. They deal with it all the time. So, yeah, they know. Now, even Tulsi Gabbard, the U.S. House of Representatives, she wrote a letter to the Navy saying, hey, I have constituents that say you're killing off my marine life. And, of course, the Navy writes back a letter that says, we protect the ocean. Well, bullshit. Someone's got to call bullshit. They had whales floating in. The fish were turning black on their skin, and their scales are all turning black.
Well, that was from a new Cajun recipe they were trying.
Yeah, so bizarre. It's bizarre.
Well, I mean, to me, I think it's a combination of a lot of these people fully know exactly what's going on, but a lot of them are sort of in a really weird kind of mental state of denial, confusion. It would be so hard to put a name on it, but the bottom line is, these people, regardless of what they really think or feel, their job's at stake, and if they speak out against anything and say even one word of truth that's not in line with their preordained dogma, they could lose their job or be forced to take an early retirement, like Terry said happened to these marine scientists that came out there and were on the verge of agreeing with what he found about that that was the microwave presence that was killing the corals, and they all basically had to take an early retirement. So it's really people afraid of losing their job and thereby sacrificing everyone who's living in the ocean.
I don't want anybody to lose their job. I just, the military, if they're going to get 50 warships together, they need them to get the hell away from the coastline. And, I laughed when I went out there because there's something in the newspaper that said the only impact people might see is their garage doors may go up on their own.
Right.
Because they're putting so much microwave radiation in the atmosphere that your garage door opener might trigger automatically.
Exactly. Well, look,
you put that many ships together, and you probably have 100 megawatts of electricity, of power, right from that.
And that would be radiating out basically spherically, right, underwater and into the air.
Yeah, and I put it all out there. There's a guys talking about. I was on a military warship, and we aimed our tracking radar on the horizon at a flock of seagulls a few miles away, and they took off and scattered because they're getting electrocuted. And because the ocean has lots of electrons and ions, and if you put a radar, you're pulling a current through the seagull.
Yes. Well, may I remind you that
From 2 miles away.
One of your favorite festivity is getting ready to happen in June, RIMPAC 2018. Are you going to come down and join in the fun and games?
Yeah, yeah. I hope they stream it on the web.
Well, look. Let me ask you this: could you create a diagram? It wouldn't have to be animated, but it would show. You did a little diagram before of RIMPAC. It showed all the boats streaming along, and you had what RIMPAC stands for. But something like that, but that's more of a 3D. Like it would show the surface of the ocean and like the 50 warships, but it would show a spherical region that all these boats would be in the center of, and half of the sphere would be above the water out into the sky, and the other half of the sphere would be underwater, and show like different gradations or different distances away of what the total effective radiated power density might be. That that would. This is like the sphere of necrosis being projected into the
I've got
environment.
a simulation. I put and I didn't do it. It's actually a software contractor that does simulations. I do a lot of simulations in my job, so I can look at models like that and understand pretty quickly what they're saying. And they show just 6 antennas on a warship. Now, the typical warship these days have 50 to 100 antennas and radars, and maybe 5 or 10 megawatts of power, pulsed power and different antennas. And it showed that what the amperage was on the surface of the seawater around the boat, right? So they put a voltage on the surface.
And this is from the antennas.
Causes electrical current.
This is from the antennas. From the antennas, right? This is not from the cathodic protection system.
Yeah, so then the cathodic systems, which are around the hull, they're pumping another. They're probably worse than the radars or antennas, unless you get a lot of them in one area. But they're pumping. They have transformers that are 110 volt transformers, and they maybe only run at 10 or 25 volts, but they're pumping hundreds of amps into the seawater around that hull. And I did some calculation. Electrofishing. Most states don't let you fish with electric probes in the water, because it's an easy way to kill a lot of fish. And actually, the larger the fish, the more sensitive it is to the voltage, because it's longer, so it has a greater voltage drop across the length of the fish. So if Moby opens his mouth, he has a 10-volt drop from his tail to his head. It's enough to electrocute him. So they say the bigger the fish, the more sensitive they are to voltage fields in the water.
And so a whale would be the most sensitive of all.
So a whale would be the most sensitive. And that's why they're concerned that maybe, geomagnetic storms could kill or strand whales. And really, a magnetic field creates an electric field in a conductor, which is what seawater is. So I agree with the thinking, but if you really think about it, the amount of voltage and current the military and maritime is putting in the seawater is a hell of a lot more than a typical geomagnetic storm.
Absolutely, but it's another convenient bogeyman, just like climate change.
It's just a diversion.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's all it is a diversion. And they would love you to focus on 1 degree of climate change and passive sonar. They want you to focus on those things, because the real problem is tens of thousands of amps of electricity and voltage in the seawater.
Absolutely. Well, look, let me ask you this. What percentage of the cubic volume of the ocean is at any given time unaffected by anthropogenic electromagnetic fields?
So, I've just charted and looked a lot at the maritime traffic. It's all along the coastlines now. In the U.S., most of the coastlines are all becoming hypoxic. They're low on oxygen, okay? The Gulf of Mexico has a dead zone the size of, Massachusetts or something. It's huge. So, now, here's the thing. I went to the Big Island. I sent you the paper that I wrote. I don't know if you read it.
I didn't have a chance.
They had a sudden coral bleaching. They had a bunch of rain. The water turned reddish brown, and then the coral started bleaching, and all the marine life started dying. And you went to the Big Island, or you're on the Big Island. It's mostly iron ores, 20% iron and aluminum from the volcano, right? Kilauea. So if you got construction sites and all that, that's just washing into the water. That's 2.5 volts of electricity that sets up corrosion and oxidation. So that's where the oxygen's going, is you're speeding up oxidation rates because of the accelerated corrosion. And so now the fish don't have biological oxygen to breathe. So they go belly up. So if corrosion rates can be sped up by a factor of 1,000 with just, tenths of a milliamp. So I think that nature is very sensitive to voltage.
Well, so you're kind of...
That's what it played out. Those Kapoho tide pools, they're fine today. There were a tremendous amount of fish and corals looking healthy, but they had this sudden death incident, and the water turned orange-red. And orange-red in the water is suspended iron.
Yes.
So anyway, so all our coastlines are becoming hypoxic, and I think it's because it's a combination, but we got mineral runoff. So any place you got underwater mining, or you got like Terry's harping on the wetlands. You know, they're putting in a hotel and they dig out the wetlands. Well, wetlands are filtered, right? They filter out the suspended solids in the water. So they clean up the water before it dumps into the ocean. You take out the wetlands, and now you're just dumping whatever's suspended, like iron and other minerals, directly into the seawater, and that's also helping to kill the reefs. So we're just screwing the place up.
Let me ask you this. What kind of synergic interactions could exist between all the different hundreds of thousands of chemicals that are in the runoff, like agricultural fertilizer and pesticides and who knows what? All of that mixed into the water, too. What kind of effects? I mean, I'm guessing it would be totally unknown, the kind of effects of how that might interact with the electromagnetic fields.
In the industries that put a lot of organic wastewater. You know, a lot of my customers cook trees, right? Pulp paper industries. They digest and cook wood, and that gives off all kinds of lignins and glues and cellulose, and that it gets washed out and goes through. And what we do is we have water treatment plants. We put a lot of bacteria in there, and the bacteria eat it up. Okay, they actually love it, and they consume it and give off oxygen or whatever as both anaerobic and aerobic respiration. So. But what my point is that as long as you dilute it down, nature does pretty well with organic material, you know, waste, you know, human waste, all that. It digests it, right? But, you know, some chemicals, you know, inorganic, you know, pesticides, all that, absolutely bad for, you know, if the concentration is high enough, right? A lot of that comes down to what's the concentration.
Yes.
And the other thing is you got to keep enough oxygen in the water. But I still believe that we have a massive corrosion, which is more of an oxidation problem.
Yes. Well, look, let me
either galvanic voltage or it's stray electrical current that somebody's putting in the water.
All right. Well, look, let me ask you something that's kind of a little different, but definitely related. There's a little island off of Great Barrier Island, New Zealand, where I spend a lot of time. It's called Rakitu. And the Department of Conservation is getting ready to go against the wishes of over half the people of Great Barrier who have formally opposed this drop. They want to drop a couple of thousand kilograms of this pesticide called brodifacoum on this island in order to try to eradicate the rats, which really aren't that much of a problem according to people who live there. And even though what I wanted to ask you is, as a chemical engineer, even though they say that this pesticide is not soluble in water, all that means is that it's not going to dissolve. That doesn't mean that the ocean's not going to transport it around. And what I wanted to ask you is that brodifacoum is based on a central atom of bromine, which is one of the halogens, which are the most reactive of all the elements. And I wanted to ask if you could speculate now and or possibly look into it when you have time on what's going to happen to the bromine that's floating around in the ocean as a halogen, as one of the most reactive elements.
So, you know, the ocean has a lot of chlorides in it, right?
Yes.
And bromides, you know, when you sit in a hot tub, they use bromine in a hot tub, right? It's because it's stronger than chlorine. So you've got chlorides and bromides or a lot of chlorides typically naturally in the seawater. Now, so am I super concerned about them? Not really. Again, it comes down to some of that stuff. It gets diluted very quickly, okay? Now, that doesn't mean to say that right where it's running off the land or where the pesticides put, that they're not going to have a lot of collateral damage in other biology, right? If it's killing rats, it's killing the other critters too.
But to be diluted, it would have to be soluble.
Ocean, a lot of that stuff will dilute fairly quickly. And like I said, the ocean has lots of chlorides in it to begin with, a little bromide. I don't think it's a big deal. But the pesticides, anything in the neighborhood, if the concentration's high enough, it'll kill it.
Yes, but if it's not soluble, how can it dilute?
So it may not dilute, it will disperse.
Exactly.
Right? So it will still disperse. So if you have something floating on the surface, like oil doesn't dissolve in water, it disperses. And it oil evaporates. So it'll naturally react with minerals, metal, so it'll get bound up with something. So no, it won't dilute, but it will disperse. And fairly quickly, I think, in the water. So you're asking my opinion. My opinion is more, why do they need to dump all that pesticide? Is it really, who's it hurting? I'm against putting a lot of pesticides into the environment. Humans try to control the environment, and whenever we do a terrible job of it, right? We're just shitty at it. We're good at killing things, but actually preserving the environment, bullshit.
Well, we've covered things that we basically talked about before, but what I keep trying to do is make an effort to sort of go into some uncharted territory, or to go to the next level, because we can keep talking about all this stuff over and over and over again, but it's not getting any better, but we're also not having any effect on what's happening. And so what do you reckon, what can any of us do other than just sit here waiting to go extinct?
Humanity has somewhat of a death wish, or the way our governments are set up to compete. I think we're caught in this mindset that worked for preservation hundreds of years ago, but I don't think it works anymore. In other words, I think our own, we're trying to, preserve our country and livelihood, but to do that, we're just the military's running amok, and we got more nukes than ever, and it's ass backwards, and I don't see it. The folks who end up being in charge of or make it the way to the top of each country tend to be egotistical and power hungry. They love it, and it builds on itself. I think it's out of control.
That's an understatement. But to say that humanity has a death wish, I mean, what could be a more clear expression of that than the fact of the existence of the global military apparatus? The U.S. military alone dwarfs. I mean, it's like, it's unbelievable to try to quantify all this stuff, and then you add in all the other militaries of the world. It dwarfs the whole civilian economy, and all our most advanced technologies are weapon systems designed to destroy life as we know it, primarily ourselves. I mean, what could be a greater form of necrophilous insanity than that?
Yeah. We've got whales washing up, unusual mortality events up and down the East Coast and the Gulf, and why isn't that NOAA ever solves it? Why have these been going on for decades, and they can't figure out what's killing the whales in the marine life? Why is that? And I think it's because it's them.
Of course it is. They're funded by the Navy.
Implicit on themselves.
They're funded by the Navy, just like Scripps and Woods Hole and the National Marine Fisheries Service. All this stuff is funded by the Navy, which is in turn funded by the International Banking Cartel. I mean, but the U.S. taxpayer is complicit in funding all this stuff.
Sure. I mean, all taxpayers are, because all governments are complicit in it, right? I mean, there's going to be, what's RIMPAC got, 20 or 30 countries? You know, they're all buying and selling weapons and testing them out in the water and blowing up a few whales, a few dolphins, you know. It's all in a day's work. And, you know, yeah, so it's taxpayer funded, but I think if people would really wake up to what the threat is, I still have this hope that there could be a change, but I don't know. As I get older, I'm more facetious. And, you know.
What kind of change could there be?
Yeah, I don't know. There's just a tremendous amount of wasted capital, money, sweat, labor on developing things to kill each other. It's just bizarre.
It is. But
it's bizarre for our children, right?
The bottom line is, I mean, when it really comes down to it, who really cares? I don't think anybody does, really, because people just go along with it.
Yeah, so I don't even profess to have a solution to it. I think people ought to wake up to what, you know, the truth is, and then they can stay in denial, or, you know, I'd hope that when I put this out there that I would upset or make a lot of researchers uncomfortable enough to prove me wrong, right? A lot in science is you put out a hypothesis, you show the evidence, and then others should prove you wrong. If they can't prove you wrong, then it's probably right. So, you know, I put it out there, and hopefully, you know, it starts with the youth, right? You know, so I still have a hope that, you know, prove me wrong, that's fine. But I got a lot of evidence. Terry's put together a tremendous amount. You've documented it down there and made public aware of it. Other scientists have, like you said, people are going to believe what they want to believe. You know, sometimes the truth hurts.
Yes. Well, so when are you going to come back to Hawaii?
I was hoping to come back to help film some more of the TV show there. And there's still, you know, Terry's been doing a lot of filming, but I don't think it got picked up by a network. So I'm not sure that was the plan. We were going to head back when that happened. So yeah, I mean, we were just there 4 or 5 months ago.
Yes.
And we love it. It's beautiful. And I really like the Big Island. It had a whole different vibe to it.
Yes. Well, Terry's talking about coming down to Australia.
You know, we'd love to get back. We were there for our honeymoon 21 years ago. On
Hamilton Island.
Yeah, we went to Hamilton and took a boat out to Hayman Island. Hayman. Beautiful area. And then we took another boat out to the outer part of the Barrier Reef and did some diving. It was awesome. And on the boat ride out, I looked at the newspaper, and a tiger shark had bitten someone the day before. And so my wife was coming up, so I turned the page on the newspaper so she wouldn't see that a tiger shark had just attacked someone the day before.
How dare it?
So, but yeah, it's beautiful countryside. Nice people too, right? Very down to earth, I felt like.
Right.
Victoria Bitter. Drank some of that.
VB. The best beer to drink is called Cooper's, though.
You know, we almost got taken out by a cyclone. I didn't know what the hell a cyclone was. That's a hurricane, right?
Spinning the opposite direction.
We don't call them cyclones up here. So that was coming towards the island as we were getting ready to leave, and we were like the last boat off the island. So, yeah, so definitely like to get back down there. I was communicating with a professor down there. She liked our research, and she wanted to get involved. So we sent her information and all, and she knew some professors at the other universities, so she spread the information around. Nice lady.
Is that someone you could put me in touch with?
I can forward you her email.
Okay. Terry tried to put me on.
She's in Melbourne.
Terry tried to put me onto a couple of graduate students that were kind of picking up on his work, but I never really heard much from them. But yeah, that would be cool.
It's shocking to me. I came up with this, that, hey, that's corrosion. And people look at me like, what? Corrosion's the most common thing we deal with in industry, and in the marine industry. It's huge. And they acted like they'd never either heard of it or thought of it.
Well,
right?
I think people think of corrosion as being on like metal ships and things like that. They don't think of it as something that happens.
They need to just open up, Google calcium and magnesium and the galvanic series, and they'll see that first off, the calcium and magnesium are metals. We call them minerals, but they're metals, and that's what a coral reef is made out of. And by the way, it will corrode very easily and oxidize.
Hey.
And the other thing is you can go on Amazon for $199 and buy a pulsed electromagnetic water softener that breaks down calcium carbonate.
You might have seen my posting a couple of weeks ago about the deep seabed mining thing that's getting ready to explode. I wanted to ask you about possible electromagnetic aspects of that with, say, for example, all the plumes of the sediment that they're going to be churning up and mining the hydrothermal vents. And do you see any kind of connection with that?
So I think two things. If you guys have all this underwater mining and all, and that, like I know in Australia, they're opening up all this underwater mining, it's going to dump lots of minerals from the seafloor up into the seawater, and that's going to speed up corrosion really fast, quickly. And then any structures they put, like any of these wind turbine structures, they're putting cathodic systems on those. So, yeah, any seafloor piping that they put out there, it'll typically have cathodic because it needs it, because it will corrode. The metals corrode quickly. So they reverse the voltage, the polarity, to keep it from corroding. But the downside is it corrodes everything else around it.
Yes. Well, now let me ask you one other question that Terry said to ask you about. He said that they're now using the electrification of the marine environment in order to detect the quiet submarines. What can you tell us about that? How would that work?
So, any warship or any submarine has an electromagnetic profile, right? And so submarines try to minimize it as much as they can, because you can detect the profile of a ship using, sensitive, sensors that detect changes in the magnetic field or the voltage in the seawater. So, so they've got systems that basically, they try to stay as quiet as they can, right? Subs and all that. But, they have to put out a certain amount of radiation to communicate, or from the propellers or from the cathodic systems. So they have a natural signature that the military, if you put a sensitive enough detectors in multiple locations, you can sort of triangulate and figure out where the disturbance is. And the disturbance is usually the vessel, right?
Yes. Well, what kind of detectors would those be?
So, it's anything that's in the water. It's a conductor that's sensitive to, there's ORP, right? The ORP sensors measure oxidation reduction potential of the seawater. And basically what they are is a voltage sensor. So now you can also detect if there's any high frequency or any, high frequencies get muted out pretty quickly in the water. So lower frequency, radiation in the water can travel further. But voltage potential, if the field itself changes, by a voltage change, you can, know that there's something causing that. and there's natural changes that occur. But if you get a vessel like a ship that's putting a few hundred amps of electricity in the water, the voltage will go up. And, you just put a cathode, anode, you can detect the change. You may have to filter out a lot of noise, right? The ocean will have a lot of other changes, so you have to filter out the noise, but what you're left with is, the signature of a ship or submarine.
Yes. Well, now, let's close on a very interesting note as we're getting close to the end of our hour. You're lucky that you weren't here to receive that text phone call alert a few weeks ago about the incoming missile.
So what'd you do, jump in the water?
I wasn't here.
Oh, yeah. You're still in Australia?
Yeah, New Zealand. But apparently, most people didn't take it seriously, but some people did. They were like, standing there holding hands and going like, oh, my God, what color flowers do we like, and things like that. But Terry reckoned that there actually was a missile that was launched, but it was launched by the U.S. as a test. They were going to try to shoot it down to impress these Japanese people there that are interested in investing in all this Lockheed anti-missile systems, and they missed. And somehow it got picked up by the Hawaiian Civil Defense Network or something like that, but I don't even buy that. I think it was because of the timing of it. There was all these bigwig Pentagon people in Kauai on that very day talking about selling these missile systems, and so the New York Times article about it said, oh yes, Hawaiians were awakened today by this incoming missile accident, but only to make them realize how unprotected they are from a North Korean missile strike.
I think all that is a bunch of bullshit, right? I think if it tells the people anything, it should tell them that the government is incompetent at protecting the people, and the military, they love when things get stirred up like that because they can tell their new weapon to save everybody. So it feeds on itself, right?
It's like a giant, it's a parasite.
If anybody believes in the end the government's going to save their ass, I wouldn't count on it. They can't, with the school shootings going on, they can't get off their ass and even push a little bit of legislation through to do something.
No,
right?
but
We got
think
kids walking into schools with machine guns.
Yeah, but all that's part of the plan. It's part of Zbigniew Brzezinski said that controlled social chaos, persistent ecological and social crises is part of the way of turning America into a more controlled socio-political environment.
Yeah, you're scaring your people. You're inciting fear, and then you're playing off it. Oh, we need another missile. We need another weapon system to protect us.
Well, look.
When in fact it's just an incompetent government agency that did the dumbass thing and pushed the wrong button.
If you sat down,
we've got thousands of nuclear warheads that
If you were invited to sit down,
touched off.
If you were invited to sit down and have a cup of coffee or go and play a few rounds of golf with Donald Trump, what do you reckon that you could actually say to that dude?
So, I've met a lot of people like that in business. The same thing you like about a person is what you hate about them. I think people like the fact that he's stirring things up, but on the flip side, they don't like it that he's such an asshole. I think there's a lot of things. I grew up in Maine, so I have this. In the summers in Maine, it would be overrun with New Yorkers and folks from Boston, so they would hunt and kill all the animals and spend all the money on the tourists up the coastline, which is fine. But I'm just saying that Donald Trump, it's good that he's stirring things up and making change, but he could do it in a little more respectable way towards people, I guess, and women.
Well, the bowl must be stirred before it can be flushed.
Yeah, so there's a lot of flushing going on right now. I guess in a way, democracy, it's doing, I mean, there's checks and balances, right? So there's a lot of, but, they're flushing out a lot of just inbred corruption that goes on behind the scenes, and there's a tremendous amount of it at that level.
Yes.
Because in the end of the day, I think they all just like the power and the prestige of the position.
Well,
and are they really out to protect the kids in a high school from getting mowed down by a machine gun or a semi-automatic with a bump stock? Nah, I don't think they are.
Well,
so I'd say it's kind of disgusting if I sat with Trump, that the whole scenario is sort of disgusting.
I've sort of lost interest in even paying attention to what my species is doing, except to monitor its destructive parasitic nature. But I just feel a lot more comfortable in the presence of trees and birds and insects and stuff than with most of my fellow quote-unquote Homo sapiens. But look, we should probably close this for now. Stewart Simonson, I can't thank you enough for your vast contributions, and hopefully we'll get to meet in person one of these days when you come down to Australia.
We definitely will sometime here.
Yes. Well, look, man.
All right, Jeff, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This is Jeff Wefferson signing out for On the Brink Radio.
Mm-hmm.